Coming up, AFN 2019.
If you do something wrong that alters someone's life, like rape them, kill them, then you belong in jail.
What about us men who've been hurt when we were younger?
What will it take to get justice for all for missing and murdered Native women? And for those who live in communities with little or no law enforcement.
If you in your community believes that there is a public safety crisis in your community, I'd like you to stand.
Ahead, why some believe this year's gathering marks a turning point towards a safer and stronger Alaska.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program. That phrase, frontier justice, evokes images of the Wild West, lawlessness romanticized in movies. But in rural Alaska, life without adequate police protection often comes with a chronic misery factor, something the Alaska Federation of Natives hopes to change. And there were many signs of that at this year's convention in Fairbanks.
And to the republic for which it stands,
When we recite the Pledge of Allegiance,
with liberty and justice for all.
that phrase, liberty and justice for all, automatically rolls off the tongue, but easier said than done.
As Alaska Natives, we yearn for good government, for it to have justice and righteousness. Lord, we know justice and righteousness happens when people are empowered and protected.
But in many Native communities across Alaska, justice is out of reach.
If you in your community believes that there is a public safety crisis in your community, I'd like you to stand.
Many rural communities have little or no law enforcement. And across Alaska, rates of sexual assault and violence are among some of the highest in the nation.
Every time I show this project, at least one woman will come up to me and say, I could have been on that project.
A project that started with this giant kuspuk, faces of missing and murdered Native women sketched with a black Sharpie pen. Silent faces that spoke volumes throughout the gathering. And so did the empty space on the back of the kuspuk, because now it appears 2 more portraits must be drawn.
It's my understanding that the same individual is thought to have murdered another Alaska Native woman from my region. So I would ask that if we could just give a moment of silence.
The news had just broken that a man from South Africa, accused in the murder of Kathleen Henry, has been charged with killing another Native woman, Veronica Abowchuk, who had been missing for more than a year.
I was struck by the unveiling of the second indictment against that gentleman from South Africa of another Native woman discovered murdered, and there where you're seeing the violence that you're having against Native women is ongoing. It's not in the history, it's not in the past, it's not we're finally just fixing something, it's ongoing.
I have struggled with personal relationships. I have felt intrinsically flawed my entire life. And it wasn't my fault at 3 years old, and it wasn't my fault 18 years ago.
On one of the panels, Anna Sattler, a survivor of sexual assault, says her big frustration, all too often, justice delayed is justice denied.
If you do something wrong that alters someone's life, like rape them, kill them, then you belong in jail.
What about us men who've been hurt when we were younger? Don't you think that's the driving force of what we've become? I know I've been hurt physically. That's easy to talk about. But what I'm getting at is the sexual stuff. You know, I've been hurt. And I've carried this on because I've been told not to talk about it.
For the first time, there is widespread agreement. There is a problem, and it needs to be addressed.
Without a radical commitment to the transformation of how we deliver public safety in rural Alaska, we begin at no beginning and we work to no end in solving all these other problems, because we just can't get there unless people feel safe first.
Commissioner, do you believe that the federal law enforcement declaration for rural Alaska issued by Attorney General Barr was necessary?
I do, yes, absolutely. I think that the public safety crisis that we face in our state has been pervasive, prevalent, and consistent.
Here we have our watering point.
AFN leaders say the Attorney General's visit to rural Alaska marks a turning point. There, William Barr saw firsthand a community racked by alcohol, where violence goes unchecked, mostly due to the lack of resources. After Barr's trip to Napaskiak, he declared a public safety emergency in rural Alaska and set aside $6 million to respond.
I met many wonderful people.
He also took part at the AFN convention via video conference to follow up.
Why did I make this my first trip outside Washington, and what made me come to Napaskiak? And I said, well, you know, I view the job of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice is to serve all the people of the United States, regardless of where they are, and I wanted to go where I felt the need was greatest.
And to address that need, the Attorney General told the convention he had lined up more than $40 million to develop long-term solutions. Well, that phrase, justice for all, in our Pledge of Allegiance, I mean, that resonated in presentation after presentation. And, you know, the fact that an Attorney General recognizes that justice is not equal in Alaska, that had to be pretty powerful for AFN.
Yes, and the fact that you had a rural public safety emergency declared by the U.S. Department of Justice. I mean, we've never seen that happen. We've never seen resources immediately made available because of an emergency in that. And then to have his participation in follow-up.
And $43 million in follow-up.
But also his attention, because he's a very extremely busy person with lots of national and international priorities, I'm sure, that are tugging at him and his team.
Julie Kitka says the Attorney General's involvement offers rural Alaska a rare window of opportunity to make some headway.
There was recognition we need to have a public safety system which has a great degree of local decision-making, local control, but that is sustainable and real.
This is something AFN has been fighting for years, and there it is.
We're not there yet. And I don't want to mislead people thinking that something magically has happened because of the convention. But we have the attention. Now it's up to us and the elected public officials to accomplish and get the job done.
I have a little bracelet. You can't see this from where you are, but I can feel this. It reminds me every day to make sure that every single Alaskan woman is safe in her home.
Senator Lisa Murkowski has had the bracelet since May, when she took the Attorney General to Napaskiak. They each got a bracelet made by the tribal administrator's daughter. Girls in Napaskiak wanted a closer look at her bracelet, as did reporters at AFN.
And there was this one that is, I love the colors. It's good to be reminded on a daily basis.
Reminded, she says, of Ashley Barr, a girl who died in Kotzebue, and Sophie Sergey, a college student murdered in her dorm.
It, unfortunately, is now reminding me of the two women that we just learned about just this week.
Murkowski told reporters she doesn't understand why it took a U.S. Attorney General to declare a crisis, something no state official has ever done.
Why did it take an outsider to see? That's something that continues to trouble me.
She says the state of Alaska needs to do more.
The state cannot look to the feds and say, you fix our problem.
It's too late for these women, but as they look out, they seem to say the best hope to bring justice for all is for the state, the federal government, and the tribes to work together.
If you believe you have some kind of hand in solutions to everything that you see in front of you, please stand.
The entire table of state, federal, and Native leaders were quick to comply.
So in this instance, we have everyone agreeing that we need to move forward. So my request of all of us is to figure out what we can bring to the table, use all the resources that we have at our hands, and do something about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian.
Also at the AFN convention, the beginning of a conversation on just what is good government, much of it directed at the governor.
We want people to stand up. We want people to use their voice.
Up next, how one Native corporation has reacted to the governor's budget cuts. The theme of this year's AFN conference, Good Government, Alaska Driven. It comes in response to some of the deep cuts Governor Mike Dunleavy made this year to state programs and services.
DPS is focused on increasing the number.
It's never happened before at an AFN convention, a governor's speech interrupted by a protest. AFN leaders appear to be caught off guard, but eventually asked the drummer to stop.
Express your beliefs in a constructive way and don't come into our house and disrespect our guest.
A guest that was invited, even though some AFN leaders had openly criticized his budget cuts.
It was our duty to take a stand, to oppose his actions, and to support his removal from office.
On the second day of the convention, a formal protest, this time in a speech from the head of the Seri Native Corporation. In August, Seri's executive board voted to support the Recall Dunleavy movement on legal grounds.
If you're not on our email list, we're asking people to sign up.
Seri even provided space for the Dunleavy recall campaign at the convention. Their booth had steady traffic.
Ta-da! So this is just from this morning.
Recall supporters were asked to write their contact information on slips of paper. The campaign says the box had to be emptied out many times.
I am proud of the people demonstrating their disapproval for the governor. I think that the things that he has done to our rural communities is unforgivable.
There was some pushback at AFN towards Governor Dunleavy in various ways.
I think it was to be expected. People were not happy with many aspects of that new administration, but I think he's got an opportunity to reset, so we're giving him the benefit of the doubt to see what happens come December in this next legislative session.
Did this theme of good government arise before you sent a letter to the governor about budget cuts or after?
I think it came after. Of course, we didn't like the massive budget cuts that were in the budget, but the pivotal point, at least for me personally, was a conversation I had with one person from the administration.
The president of AFN says when she asked the governor's representative about the impact of the cuts, she says she didn't like the answer.
They told you, well, I don't know, it's just math. And that kind of really hit home to me that for our people, it's not just math. There's real people, there's people's jobs at stake, there is critical services, the role of the university. And so that really got you thinking that really what we're talking about is we're a very wealthy state, and we're talking about how do we set our priorities, and that led to what is good government and how do we, what's our role in helping good government.
Throughout the conference, every aspect of state government was under the microscope, and state officials from every branch of government were there to weigh in. Even the governor appeared to offer an olive branch and announced he would increase support for public safety and launch a new education program.
My administration will be introducing a bill this coming legislative session that will make tribal compacting for education a reality. I look forward to working with tribes and lawmakers to craft legislation to put tribal compacting for education into law.
Outside the convention hall, the governor had support from those who back his push to pay a full permanent fund dividend, one of the big issues where there is no consensus yet from AFN's membership. Like the dancing and the drumming, the debate will be back for an encore next year. So how did the governor feel about what happened at the convention? His office issued this statement: I firmly believe in the rights provided to all Alaskans through the First Amendment. We are given the right to free speech and protest. It's one of the unique things about our country. Well, he also said it appeared to him that the group of individuals didn't agree with his handling of the budget and said that it is their right to protest. Well, the governor has another big supporter, President Donald Trump, who tweeted about the recall movement. Trump said that the governor is doing an unbelievable job of fulfilling his campaign promises, and he blamed the recall movement on Democrats who he says are out to get the governor. Well, up next, why the heart of the convention is much more than politics. What makes this gathering a celebration of culture and a showcase for talents of Alaska Natives across our state. Also ahead, Jocelyn Estes, a longtime observer of the AFN convention, weighs in. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Alaska Federation of Natives, here's a quick look at what they're all about. It was formed in 1966 to fight for native lands. Among its members, 191 federally recognized tribes, 171 village corporations. Its October convention is the largest convention in Alaska. And joining us now, a journalist with a long history covering AFN, Jocelyn Estes, and many of you probably know of Jocelyn, heard her voice on public radio, and you have also hosted KNBA's live coverage of AFN and tried to retire from broadcasting, but I understand that Indian Country Today has roped you back in. You're a correspondent for them. Congratulations on that move. But going to AFN, you know, every convention has moments that stand out. In your mind, what stands out from this convention? What will you remember?
Well, you hit on several of them in your package about public safety, some of the heartbreaking stories that people had to tell. But on a more positive note, at the very end, when they were adopting resolutions, two young women stood up and gave a great explanation and defense of a resolution on climate change. And many people stood up and spoke against the resolution, and they were just so brave and well-spoken.
So articulate.
Yes, and they got a standing ovation at the end. One was Quanah Potts, and I'm forgetting the first name, but it was Yvonne Peters' daughter. And they're 15 and 16 years old, and I think everybody was just blown away at how brave and well-spoken they were.
You know, and this resolution came out of the sort of the preview to AFN, the Elders and Youth Conference. So it was pretty powerful that it made its way to the floor of AFN.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought it was an indication of a generational division, that young people are moving forward on this and showing leadership more than their elders sometimes. That was how some people interpreted it.
Well, I guess that's always good to see the young generation involved. You got to give them the space for that. You know, one thing that didn't get much attention at AFN was Senator Lisa Murkowski's announcement that she was putting forth legislation for a pilot project involving tribal law enforcement programs. How significant was this?
I think it's a really big deal. Probably one of the most important things that came, it didn't come out of AFN, but it was announced at AFN, because there have been, tribes have inherent sovereignty over their citizens, and that means that they can prosecute and judge crimes. But the state and individuals, sometimes who have been sentenced in tribal courts, have questioned and challenged tribal sovereignty on this issue over and over and over and over, and other aspects of tribal sovereignty. And this will lay that to rest.
I mean, it's kind of amazing because the state of Alaska for so many years has fought tribes, opposed any jurisdiction at all. So it's kind of interesting that so many different organizations, groups, state leaders were, even the governor was saying, let's do something with the tribes.
Well, I think it's because it's such a crisis. I mean, this came up over and over at the convention, that Alaska has been leading. It's been in the top 5 for missing and murdered and sexually assaulted Native women, or women, period, for decades. And it's, is one of the, I think it was, I'm forgetting if it was the U.S. attorney, a federal employee, who said, it's time to try something new.
And so they did.
And the other thing is this law doesn't take away anything from the state. So I think, it's designed in such a way that tribes in the state will collaborate and work together on this.
Boy, collaboration, that is where it seems to be at. How will this AFN stack up to past conventions that you've covered?
Okay, so I brought this because I think I like it so much.
Oh,
this
that was
is
the program.
Yeah, this is Rosita Whirl. So, but what stands out to me is that they really stuck to the theme. So from the welcome from the mayors, and then in the opening, and they had kids coming up periodically and reading from the state constitution. And, the chair and some of the local leaders admonished the protesters who stood up during the governor's speech. But in a way, the entire program is a repudiation of what the governor's been doing. And I think it'll stand out for that they had a good theme. It was very timely, and they stuck to it, and it carried throughout the entire conference.
We've talked a lot about AFN business, but what about the cultural aspect? I mean, the dancing seems to be more refined, more amazing every year. What stood out this year in the dancing?
I'm not sure that any single performance stood out. The whole thing is so heartwarming, and especially, you can't help but just be so thrilled when you see children performing. Little bitty kids, 3, 4 years old, and they know all the moves, they know the songs, and several times young people came out and introduced themselves in their own language, Tlingit or Yupik or Inupiaq or Athabascan, and that's also very touching.
Just very quickly, we want to talk about the arts fair because that's one of the most amazing things.
Yeah, I have to restrain myself.
Me too.
Every year. And it's really nice having the convention in Fairbanks because you have so many more Athabascan artists at the fair.
I love it. Well, thank you, Jocelyn. Well, we're going to leave you now with a performance from the Innu Yupiaq dance group from Fairbanks. They took to the stage on the second night of AFN's Guyana, Alaska. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.